Yes, it is World Tuberculosis Day, which is marked March the 24th every year. You know that Africa and indeed Nigeria has a huge burden of tuberculosis. So we want to pay attention to these issues because it looks like they will be exacerbated by the withdrawal of aid, funding generally from USAID for one, and all of the other attendant issues. And we're joined on the program this morning from the University of Cambridge in the UK, Ademola Ayunuro, who's a PhD candidate in pathology. Good morning, Ademola. You're welcome to the Morning Brief. I'll just get right into it because I know you've done a lot of work with tuberculosis in Nigeria, and of course you're stepping it up with what you're currently doing in pathology right now. But, you know, looking at data, that report by the National Tuberculosis and Leprosy Control Program, noting that Nigeria alone now accounted for 23% of deaths resulting from TB in Africa. And that report came out last year. It was reported last year. And now that was a time there was still funding from the USAID, right? That was still a time where there was a lot of work being done, and you also participated in that. So with all of the suspension of funding, what does the now and the future look like, at least for Nigeria's fight against tuberculosis?
Hi, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, it calls for a serious concern because our efforts to fight, to control, to detect tuberculosis is highly dependent on funds in terms of intervention by the government, public and private health centers. And over the years, we have benefited from the support of the USAID in terms of providing these funds, especially for the screening, the testing, and the treatments. So in light of this, I think it calls for a serious concern, and we might be at a risk of, you know, losing these fights gradually and perhaps steadily. Because it's difficult, or it's very difficult for the average Nigerian to afford these drugs, these medications for the treatments. But over the years, we have benefited from these fundings whereby when individuals are screened and they are enrolled for this regimen, which takes in most instances 6 months. So, and of course, there has to be encouragement. You have to encourage these people to take up their medication because it is a long period, and the adverse effects with the cost of living challenges. So, and this has been made easy because they don't have to pay for this medication. So, however, in the light of this, we just have to wait to see what happens. I understand the federal government are trying to caution these effects by supplementing and adding to the budgets. But it's difficult to say how that would mitigate these halts in funding from the USAID. So I would say it's a disaster waiting to happen.
Ademola, if I can come in quickly here, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Pardon me, I just want to put this in context quickly. How much does it cost to manage TB in terms of medication treatment? Maybe monthly, at least last time you checked, Ademola.
Well, I would say it's difficult to say the exact cost because it's been free, to be honest with you, and it's difficult. However, you can look at the costs for the follow-up tests for the screening, because once you are diagnosed, in fact, the testing it's free because literally you have to encourage individuals to get tested, encourage them to produce their sample, and upon diagnosis of the disease, enrolled for treatment free of charge. So I cannot really say, but from rough estimates, you could imagine hundreds or a few thousands of dollars that it would cost for these treatments. But I can't really say the exact amount because it has been free thanks to funding from the USAID.
So, Dr. Ademola, let's talk about the truths we should face now that the reality has beckoned. Because one of the things people found out, a lot of people may not agree with the policy of Trump, but it has helped a lot of countries now look inwards and say, okay, wait a minute, what have we been doing since? So, abdicating responsibility partially or totally in some sectors, it's beginning to be clearer that we need to do something quickly. Things as fundamental as health. should not be abdicated in any shape or form, partially or totally. And now we're seeing this situation. So maybe you help us project the reality we are facing and the level of intervention that is needed, especially in the short term, to be able to mitigate in terms of funding, in terms of personnel, in terms of facility, in terms of resources for drugs.
Yes, thank you. Quite a number of colleagues, I had a chat with quite a number of colleagues when this news came up that Donald Trump has halted his funding. And with all due respect, most people say, well, it's probably time for Nigeria, for African countries, to go back to the drawing board and enough of being over-reliant and dependent on this funding. But I put it to you, are we actually ready? Do we have the resources and abilities to cope at this short term? How long would it take us to be prepared? I worked as a public health official for a tuberculosis project funded by USAID back in from 2018, 19, and 2020 before I left Lagos. And you know, we could just see how life was made easy for this battle against tuberculosis by this funding. From the screening, from the health workers that are employed, from the testing, from the treatment, from the medication. In fact, from this follow-up that we had to do, paying patients visits in their home, contact tracing, home visits, to ensure that they are taking their medication promptly and adequately. So how do we balance that up if we don't get the financial resources that has been the backbone, the core of our work? So I do not think we are ready. We just have to be honest with ourselves. And then, frankly speaking, some of my colleagues are struggling with this reality now, like, because the funding has been halted, the job security is no longer there. So how do I even, encourage an individual in the neighboring community or in certain health centers to get tested or treated when I'm not even being paid for it? Not to talk of there isn't drugs that are available because the funding has been halted. So it is a difficult situation that we are in. Whether the federal government are able to provide enough funds to ensure this continues, to ensure that we are on top of this situation in our ongoing efforts to fight tuberculosis, it remains to be seen. However, with what we have benefited from the USAID so far, and the reality of the response of the government, of the federal government to this kind of situation, it's difficult to say, to be honest.
All right, Dr. Ademola, how much do you think we're talking about here? I know that the federal government has committed some 700 billion to some health intervention recently. I can't, at this moment, say what it covers, but when we talk about TB, for instance, as in terms of specificity, how much are we talking about here that we can budget to be able to at least go a long way or move the needle in that sense?
It will be enormous. Okay, for instance, the machine we use to test tuberculosis, a nucleic acid amplification assay, call it the Gene Expert machine. It's very, very expensive, and state governments could even struggle to afford this equipment because you need to have it in various health centers, in various local government areas, in different states, in rural communities, in hard-to-reach communities. So aside from what the federal government can do, we also have to look at what the state government can do as well. It's difficult because there are few hospitals in Nigeria, okay, in Lagos State, that has this equipment, and they were provided by the USAID. In terms of private hospitals having this equipment, yeah, quite a few private hospitals have this equipment, but the cost for consultation alone could chase the common man out of these hospitals, not to talk of the cost for the test itself and the screening. So you are looking at millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that would be adequately and judiciously put into these efforts. Yes, so it's on a high cost, and if we are struggling with certain funds, if we are struggling with the allocation of resources by the federal government, as we've seen in time past, a few years ago we had the battle against COVID-19, and I think we should have learned quite a lot of lessons from that. But it's difficult that we are still having this kind of conversation now, and the hope of what the federal government are able to provide to continue in our efforts against this. So it's on a high cost, I would imagine.
Well, I know the goal is to reduce deaths by 95%. The target is 2035, by the way. And I should say that the government, or at least the agency of government responsible for tuberculosis and leprosy, is still confident that Nigeria can end TB by 2035 in spite of this funding cost. But I just want you to leave with this, because I was looking at the data, about 500,000 people living with tuberculosis, 20% or so not even diagnosed just yet. I want you to tell us maybe just one story of someone maybe that you, or a case that you knew about, a TB case, because a lot of people just think this case is far away, it doesn't concern me, what is TB? But these are real cases. So maybe let's end this conversation with one case that you remember that you think was remarkable and can drive home the point about really focusing on TB and the funding for it.
Yes, thank you. I had a very interesting case in 2019, and was it early 2020 to be precise. And I would say that case was very interesting because this was in the heat of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we understand, or we could flash back to what it was like with the COVID-19 pandemic in Lagos, Nigeria, the lockdown, and as well as the overlying symptoms, some of the symptoms between pulmonary tuberculosis and COVID-19. So at this instance, patients were even were skeptical about complaining about their symptoms, about going to the hospital because of the stigmatization of COVID-19. Certain private health centers in Lagos were not ready to admit patients who were coughing, who were showing these symptoms, because there was an initial policy that if you come in contact with a patient, the health center should be closed for 2 weeks for proper fumigation and those health procedures like that. So I had a patient, because I was working with So I had a patient who was coughing, and she had been visiting a few of these hospitals, but just at the entrance, at the gate, the security man was even the one doing screening. You did cough? That's just the first question. If you said, yes, I want to see doctor, they will say, no, we are not seeing you today. They don't even care to understand if it was COVID-19 or pulmonary tuberculosis. So, the patient had, severe symptoms. The lung was damaged and things like that. So it took intervention for the patients to actually come to the clinic where I was domiciled, where I was working. And initially, I got calls from the previous hospitals that the patient had visited that it's a suspected case of COVID-19 and that we should be careful in attending to the patients. However, I don't know where the courage came from. I just, directed the patient to produce the sputum sample, and we did the tests, and the patient came out to be TB positive. And this diagnosis was quite late, and the lungs were damaged, coughing out blood, extreme loss of weight, sweating at night. So the symptoms were really, really pronounced. In fact, for cases like this, in the absence of COVID-19, we don't even need to do thorough investigation for you to see that there are clear signs of tuberculosis. So upon diagnosis, treatment was started, and the patient really, really went through that difficult phase and was eventually treated successfully. You would imagine that because of the fear of COVID-19, you could have lost that patient to pulmonary tuberculosis that can be prevented and as well treated. So that was a very interesting thing.
I'm glad that story ended on a very good note. I was holding on to every word you were saying just to be sure that it was going to be a happy ending. And I'm glad that these are stories we can look at and at least show government and those responsible for funding that, see, there are hundreds of thousands of these cases that we need to rescue. We've been speaking with Ademola Ayinuro, who's a PhD candidate in pathology at the University of Cambridge, UK, on this World TB Day. The theme, by the way, is Yes, We Can End TB. Commit, invest, deliver. Thank you, Ademola. Wish you the very best.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
We'll take a quick break now, and when we return, we'll talk about data. Oh yes, data on your device. How do you handle it? How do you move it from one place to the other, but ensure that your data is safe? That's in a moment. Stay with us.